Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. U.S. forces were attacked several times over the last 2 days in the Middle East. This comes after corporate media spread fake stories claiming that Israel bombed a hospital in Gaza. It's now clear that news outlets published false photos, they gave fake numbers of deaths, and they also pinned the blame on Israel, while it turns out it was a jihadist group operating alongside Hamas in Gaza. The stories on this led to mass protests and riots globally. In Washington, Representative Rashida Tlaib, she led a protest and a takeover of the Cannon House office building on Capitol grounds. She did this while agitating the crowd using the fake story, which she later refused to apologize for. Even Senator John Fetterman, a fairly hard-left Democrat, came out to criticize Congress members who blamed Israel. He wrote on X, "It's truly disturbing that members of Congress rushed to blame Israel for the hospital tragedy in Gaza. Who would take the word of a group that just massacred innocent Israeli citizens over our key ally?" Now, elsewhere in the United States, student groups and socialist movements continue with their protest against Israel and in support of Palestinians and Hamas. Yesterday, the U.S. State Department issued a worldwide caution, and this was an alert to Americans. It said due to increased tension in various locations around the world, the potential for terrorist attacks, demonstrations, or violent actions against U.S. citizens and interests, the Department of State advises U.S. citizens overseas to exercise increased caution. Now, around the world, including in many parts of Europe, there were mass protests on the streets as well, and these came amidst a recent string of actual Islamist terror attacks in some of those countries. After a teacher was stabbed to death in a terror attack in France, they deployed an additional 7,000 troops on their streets. French President Emmanuel Macron is now calling to deport immigrants who have ties with extremism. And in some Muslim countries, well, the fake news resulted in actual armed attacks from organized terrorist movements. Now, it's not clear what the scale of these is just yet, but a U.S. defense official told Reuters there were drone attacks on the U.S. Al-Tanf base, which is close to Syria's border with Iraq and Jordan. It was reported that Lebanon's Iran-aligned Al-Mayadeen TV, they claimed there was a missile attack on the U.S. military Kanako base, which is also in Syria. Details on these attacks are still pretty slim, but other attacks were actually confirmed by the Pentagon. The United States Naval Institute reported that USS Carney, which is a guided missile destroyer, shot down 3 missiles and 8 drones. These were launched from Houthi-controlled territory in Yemen. Now, the Houthis are an Iran-backed terrorist group, and Pentagon Press Secretary, Brigadier General Pat Ryder, he told reporters on Thursday there were no casualties to U.S. forces and none that we know of to any civilians on the ground. But he noted that it wasn't clear what the missiles they intercepted were, but that they were heading north, potentially towards targets in Israel. Now, he didn't say, again, which types of missiles they intercepted, but with Iran's backing, the Houthis do have long-range strike capabilities, including, notably, with land attack cruise missiles. Some of these would be able to strike at the southern parts of Israel. Alongside all of this, there was also an attempted attack on U.S. military bases in Iraq. U.S. Central Command confirmed that the United States intercepted 3 drone attacks, and these were targeting 2 different bases. U.S. CENTCOM said, in the last 24 hours, the U.S. military defended against 3 drones near U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq. In western Iraq, U.S. forces engaged 2 drones, destroying one and damaging the second, resulting in minor injuries to coalition forces. It says separately, in northern Iraq, U.S. forces engaged and destroyed a drone, resulting in no injuries or damage. They say they're continuing to assess the impact to operations. Now, U.S. CENTCOM added that in this moment of heightened alert, they say they are vigilantly monitoring the situation in Iraq and the region. They said they want to emphasize U.S. forces will defend U.S. and coalition forces against any threat. Now, taken as a whole, the various attacks, they are a concerning sign that the conflict between Israel and Hamas can possibly spread to other countries. Iranian TV, notably, they were claiming that terror proxy forces were expected to join the war against Israel. And Iran's supreme leader stated in an address that if these crimes continue, he said the Muslims will become impatient, the resistance forces will become impatient, and no one will be able to stop them. These groups would allegedly be Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. And keep in mind that we just saw terror groups in all of these areas just make attempts to strike U.S. forces and U.S. military bases. Now, the United States is at a serious risk right now of getting pulled into a war or even several wars. As I've been stating, the Chinese Communist Party is working to pull the United States into 4 wars. Keep in mind the various factions behind all of this that we're now watching. Iran is the common factor behind the terror groups that are now launching the attacks, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Iran should be understood as just really not a lone actor. It ties into the global axis against the United States and its allies. These are China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, many satellite states, including in Latin America and Africa, and also throughout the Arab world. It's also now revealed that many of the weapons used by Hamas, the terrorists in their attack against Israeli civilians, they were likely North Korean weapons that had been brought to Iran. Now, it's not that well known, but North Korea is one of the world's largest arms traffickers. And with rumors that North Korea or even the CCP could supply weapons and ammo to Russia, notably separately for its war in Ukraine, Iran is again regarded as the proxy between them. It's the waypoint, which can help facilitate weapons trafficking for the war or even many wars, which are now happening. Now, it seems that the goal of the United States right now is to keep these wars as proxies, really, and to avoid getting pulled into direct involvement if possible. President Joe Biden gave an address to the nation from the Oval Office yesterday, and this follows notably his recent trip to Israel, where he met with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Biden focused his address on the importance, in his words at least, of backing Israel and Ukraine in their wars. But on this, it seemed that he suggested that Russia would become the big focus still, and that the goal with Israel and Hamas, well, that's going to be to prevent the conflict from growing. Watch.
You know, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threats to America and the world keep rising. So if we don't stop Putin's appetite for power and control in Ukraine, he won't limit himself just to Ukraine. When I was in Israel yesterday, I said that when America experienced the hell of 9/11, we felt enraged as well. While we sought and got justice, we made mistakes. So I cautioned the government of Israel not to be blinded by rage.
Now, Biden then goes on to talk more about Russia's war in Ukraine. And keep in mind as well that Biden is requesting $105 billion for Ukraine, Israel, and other programs. It turns out that most of that, though, about $61.4 billion, would be for Ukraine. Israel would get about $14.3 billion, and another $30.1 billion, well, that's for various other programs. Remember this in context as well of Secretary of State Antony Blinken in his recent tour of the Arab region. He met with the leaders of most of the Muslim countries in the area and with the Israeli leadership as well. It seemed that with him as well, I said, the goal with the Israel-Hamas war is to keep it limited and not let it spread. Biden's stated message to Israel was also to not be, quote, blinded by rage. And this is going to be a fine line as Israel prepares its ground assault on Gaza. It's very possible that with media and propaganda, the global protests and attacks that came as a result of the recent fake story on the hospital bombing, this could soon become a daily occurrence as, again, that ground operation begins. Now, in my personal take, it seems the goal is that the United States is trying to avoid direct involvement. If it's true right now that we are seeing proxy attacks from Iran and possibly from the CCP, then the U.S. defending against these through other proxies while trying to keep them contained is to avoid what this all could become, a third world war. Now, it seems Biden's focus is instead on letting Russia grind its own military down in Ukraine, but it also raises questions on, well, why is Biden not refreezing the billions of dollars for Iran? Well, there's a possibility that the money is a bargaining chip, which can be taken away just as easily as it was given, a bribe of sorts to prevent Iran from escalating. But take it as you will. President Donald Trump, he's been accusing Biden of allowing Iran to bounce back from near oblivion. And the attacks on Israel, he says, are a result of oil policies and Biden freeing up their cash. But one thing is pretty certain. The world is entering a very dangerous time. Any move right now can have broad consequences. And behind the noise are other powers pulling the strings towards a global conflict. Well, folks, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, stay informed and stay free.